I thought history might be more important today. So we're going to talk about history to start with, and if I've got enough time after my love and passion for history, then we might talk about business, okay? So I'm going to go back to 1888. In 1888, there was an incredible invention made. John Dunlop thought it was pretty dangerous riding around on a push bike with timber around the wheels, sometimes metal around the wheels, and he invented the pneumatic tyre, mainly because he's worried about one of his kids playing on a toy, so he invented the pneumatic tyre, the first tyre to have air put in the tyre. So a fantastic invention. Push bikes started to come out with it, racing bikes came out with it, people were winning races because they had these unbelievable pneumatic tyres. And it took a few years, about 1895, before Andre Michelin, from Michelin tyre fame, thought this wasn't a bad idea for cars as well. So he came up with the idea of pneumatic tyres on cars. So picture back to 1895, you've got not many cars on the road, and you've got roads that probably didn't look quite as good as the bitumen out the front of the school at the moment. So there were probably cobblestones, maybe dirt, maybe gravel, potholes. But the other really important thing was that you had lots of horses on the road. And horses, of course, have got shoes that are nailed onto their feet, and those nails sometimes come out. So imagine, Andre Michelin, fantastic invention, pneumatic tyres, and people go out in these cars with pneumatic tyres, and they go on cobblestone roads and run over nails, and they get punctures. So all these people who thought they were pretty flash in their nice new car were stuck on the side of the road, pulling off tyres, getting the tube out, vulcanising the rubber to actually patch it, pumping it back up again, and all those people on horse and sulky would go past laughing at these flash people with their top hats changing tyres. As so many inventions and ideas, it was bleedingly obvious, but Walter and Tom Davies, brothers, came up with the idea in 1904 of the spare tyre. They had the Stepney spare wheel. And so basically they said, why don't you just have a spare wheel on your car rather than worry about trying to patch it on the side of the road? So people put spare tyres or spare wheels on the running boards on their cars on each side, one on the boot, because you'd get a fair few punches on a normal trip. So brilliant invention, and Walter and Tom Davies, I'm sure, made a lot of money out of this wonderful invention. Jump forward to about 1945 when Michelin again, this is the car company, not the individual, invented the radial tyre. And basically the radial tyre, the steel belted radial, underneath the rubber on your car or any car that you see now, has got a layer underneath there that's got metal and sometimes nylon that's strapped across it to protect the tyre, keep it in its form, but more importantly, stop nails going through and puncturing the tyre. So, great, fantastic. We've now got nice bitumen roads like we've got outside the school. We've got not too many horses. When's the last time someone saw a horse out on the road? Not too many horses on the road, losing nails as we go along. And we've got these wonderful steel-belted radial tyres that are sitting there, reducing the likelihood of punctures. When you analyse the actual likelihood of you having a car breakdown problem, and this is stats from NRMA, RACV, the number one problem, can anyone guess what the number one problem might be as to why you have a breakdown in your car? No? Flat battery. The number one problem, 41% of the time, people are broken down, can't go any further, they've got a flat battery. Number two, 11% of the time, they run out of fuel. Number three, and I don't quite work this one out, number three at 8% is they get to the point where they lock themselves out of the car. I don't know how you do that with modern keys, but it's still 8% of the time. And way down in fourth place at 7% is a problem with their tyre. Flat tyre, they've got some sort of problem with their rim, but something where they need to change their tyre. So it's way down there in fourth place, but when I went through a tour, it was before COVID, probably a few months before COVID, I went through a tour of a car factory and it was fantastic. I saw these huge billets of metal and they were turned into sheet metal and then turned into a car, and just watching that manufacturing process and the technology there was unbelievable. And when the gentleman who took me through was showing me the car at the end of it that we'd seen effectively built that day as we went through the factory, we opened the boot and had a look, and there's a spare tyre in there. I said, that's interesting, there's a spare tyre in there. And I rattled off the stats and I said, number fourth at 7% is the likelihood, but I don't see this car having a spare battery, because people have flat batteries more often than have a problem with a wheel. I don't see a spare petrol tank. I don't see a hidden key somewhere or an app that you can unlock your car with to get things out of the car, yet we've still got a spare tyre in the car. Even just the weight of that spare tyre over the life of this car will chew up $120 more petrol because you've got to carry that extra weight around. And so I said to him, I don't understand, please explain to me why this car's got a spare tyre. And his answer was 7 words. And there are some 7-word expressions that I absolutely hate. If my wife is right, which she so often is, and I'm wrong, or if in your situation when your parents are always right, or your teacher's always right, as they so often are, and they say something like, but darling, remember I told you so. So you kind of go, yeah, okay, I remember that. Or one of the most famous misquotes, in fact, the number 5 most famous misquotes in movie history is, if you build it, he will come. Build it and they will come is not a strategy, a business strategy, it's a prayer more than anything else. But the 7-word expression I hate more than anything else is, and this is what this gentleman said on this day, is, but we've always done it that way. And that makes me tear my hair out when you have someone say, we're just doing something because we've always done it that way. It is the worst possible reason you can ever give. And let me give you some business examples. In 1888, back to when John Dunlop invented the pneumatic tyre, Kodak, the film company, started. Incredibly successful company. In 1974, one of their very clever employees came up with an invention called a digital camera. He put a patent on it, so Kodak owned the first patent for a digital camera. And Kodak said, we better shelve that because we sell rolls of film. Our business is selling rolls of film. By the year 2000, or 1999 actually, they had 800,000 rolls of film a year sold in the US, and Kodak owned 70% of that market share. I'd be pretty happy as a company owning 70% market share in something that's so big. So they believed they were in the business of selling rolls of film. They weren't. They were in the business of capturing memories. The way it was being utilised was rolls of film, but then digital cameras came along and they filed for bankruptcy in 2011. So they went from a huge market share of a huge industry to then being effectively bankrupt within a decade. So a business with all that history, with more than 100 years of history, went broke because they kept doing the same thing they'd always been doing. Why do you sell rolls of film? Oh, we've always sold rolls of film. No, they were capturing memories. They needed to know that. When you look at Thomas Cook Travel is another example. 1841 that started. And Thomas Cook Travel came up with this brilliant idea of packaging. They would do the research for you. They'd find out what flights or what boat cruises went to a certain location, and what motels you could stay at, and what things you could do in that city. And they packaged it all up, and when someone like Mrs. Eddy came along with her darling husband and said, we're going to go on holidays and take the kids away, Thomas Cook Travel would say, here's the package for you. And you go, that's fantastic, I love it, that's great, let's go and do that. And then this funny little thing called the internet came along. And people could actually start to research their own accommodation, their own things to do, their own flights or travel, and they didn't need packages. They still needed somewhere to book travel, but they didn't need packages. And packages kept being offered by Thomas Cook Travel to the point where Thomas Cook Travel filed for bankruptcy. A lot of people lost their money because they booked holidays with Thomas Cook Travel and then they went broke. So businesses that have got this huge history keep doing things the same way, and what they end up with is no business. So let's jump forward to a more modern example. So there are examples from back in the 1800s that have continued on to almost today. But let's go to 1985. There was a company that came up with a very innovative idea. Blockbuster home videos. Anyone remember actually going to a home video store? So you used to go in, you look at all the shelves, you'd pick out your video, you'd pay a few dollars, you go home, rent it, then get a late fee when you never brought it back on time, and then basically Blockbuster would make their money out of that. And there was this funny little thing that happened. There was a small company, a small nothing company. They started in 1985, and there was this small company in the mid to late 90s that came up with this little idea of mail order. So they thought, we think it's more convenient for people to send them out their video, and then when they finish, they just post it back. That's more convenient than having all these video stores. Because Blockbuster at the time had grown to this huge entity. They had more video stores across the entire world than any other company. In fact, it almost rivaled all other video stores put together. So they were a huge organisation. So this little company started off with mail order. They went along for a few years, quite successful. And at one stage, they had some discussions with Blockbuster about buying them out. They said, we think we've got a really good model. Why don't you buy us out? And they laughed at this silly idea of mail order. And the amount was in the millions, but in the whole scheme of things was nothing for a company the size of Blockbuster. They rejected their offer. And this little company kept ticking away with different ideas. And then they got this idea of streaming and actually delivering content straight to your TV without even having to get it in the mail. And that little company called Netflix is still going along okay at the moment. I'm not sure if anyone's heard of Netflix, but it seems to get a few views and a few subscribers. And Blockbuster, guess what? Filed for bankruptcy. So again, Blockbuster thought that the way they were going to continue going on forward was to have people to keep coming to stores because that's what they thought people wanted. Again, they weren't in video rental business, they were in the entertainment industry, and they needed to make sure that they were able to provide entertainment to people. So, always done it that way, but we've always done it that way, keep doing the same thing you've always done. All those things are the worst things you can possibly do in business. What you've got to do in business is keep reinventing, keep reimagining, keep looking at what you're doing and analysing what you're doing and changing it. And one of the things I do some business consultancy for businesses, and I come along and I say, I'll spend a certain amount of time and effort doing things for you, and there's my fee that I'll charge you to do all that. But I put a big red clause in there. And in that clause it says, this is the fee that I'll charge you, except if anyone in management, any of your staff, anyone in the organisation at any time that I'm doing work for you says, but we've always done it that way, your fee doubles. Which sounds pretty harsh, but the idea is I want to make sure that no one in there falls back on a very lazy, very simple way of explaining why we do things. Now, I don't mind if someone says, we've done it this way for 100 years and we've done it this way because, and they give me a reason why they're doing it that way. No problems at all. But the reason, but we've always done it that way, is not a good enough reason for me. I always want to hear some reason, some logic, some idea about why things are being done in a certain way. And sometimes in an organisation, the best thing to do is to grab your newest employee, take them in and sit them down and say, tell me the things that are wrong with our business, because they're looking at a business with cleaner eyes. Some people have been in the business for years and they get blinkered and they just keep doing the same thing over and over without realising that they're repeating their crimes, if you like. I'm going to get some of you to tell me where you're up to with your business plans, because you've got about, 4 weeks to go, Mrs. Eddy, in terms of getting to the end of the term. And so I'm going to get you to actually give me some ideas, and I'm going to give you a bit of feedback around what things you might need to think about, what things you might need to look at, and I might ask you some questions. But that's one of the things that I think is really important in business, is that critical thinking. And that whole idea about the spare tyre, all of that is a true story. Everything is based on absolute historical fact and the true story when I went through a car factory. But again, it's that thing where people just keep doing the same thing over and over and over. And I think just simple things will start to change. And so, for example, I drive a Tesla, and I love the Tesla Motor Company for a whole range of reasons, but one thing they do is they don't say, we've always done it that way. I don't have a spare tyre in my car. I can pull my phone out of my pocket, or it's not my pocket, I can pull my phone out and I can unlock my car from here. The car's parked over in the teacher's car park. It's connected to the internet, it's part of the Internet of Things. If I lose my key, well, actually I don't even need keys. I just use my phone to get in and out of my car. So you've got that new age of thinking, you've got traditional car manufacturers still doing things the same way. They'll blink and you'll see companies like Tesla, you'll see companies that don't really make cars yet but will soon, like Apple and like Google, who will think about things in a different way, and before you know it, those traditional car companies, unless they start to reimagine the way they're doing things, they'll be left by the wayside just as quickly as Kodak, Blockbuster, Thomas Cook Travel, any number of, or any range of a number of businesses that haven't continued to reinvent themselves. And one thing that's been really interesting with COVID-19 has been that my estimation is that you've had about 3 years of technology development that's occurred in 3 months. Because people talked about video conferencing and we should do a bit more of that and people don't need to go into work. And they were going to keep talking about it, but they kept going into work because why? They'd always gone into work. But suddenly you were forced to change things. Suddenly you were forced to sit at home and do schoolwork. Suddenly employees were able to sit at home and do their work. It changed things dramatically. So suddenly we had to have the internet bandwidth. Companies had to be able to provide that bandwidth. We had to have companies like Zoom ramp up their back-end servers to be able to cope with all that additional traffic. So suddenly all these technology things changed very quickly and we had to imagine a whole new world. Now my hope is that when we come out of COVID, whenever that might be, we'll learn some lessons from that. I hope we don't fall back into some of those same old habits. My fear is that we may well do. But it was a great chance to actually progress that development of technology in a very short time frame. So that's enough from me.